Hello and welcome to ATG, the podcast. And we're very pleased to talk today to Joy Connolly, who is President of the American Council of Learned Societies. Good to talk to you, Joy.
Thank you for having me, Michael. It's great to be here.
So let's start with classics, which seems to be a fundamental part of you. How did you get interested in the classics in the first place?
I owe all of that to my teachers, going back to my high school days, who were advocates for understanding the deep past and literature and language of people who are very different from us today. And that's what brought me into the field originally. And I continue to be fortunate to have incredible teachers through my college years, and that brought me to graduate school. The idea of keeping this field alive and thriving, and alive and kicking, I should say, is a great challenge that attracted me and pulled me into graduate school. And here I am, still active in the field today.
So I've searched through your very extensive CV, but I haven't been able to find what the subject of your PhD was. What was the topic?
It now seems so far away, but I'm so happy to talk about it. It's because it's not far away in its substance. I got very interested in the course of my doctoral work in the ways in which ancient Greeks and Romans, of course, elite writers, all we have access to, or for the most part, the most we have access to these days. I got very interested in how elite Greek and Roman writers thought and wrote about how people communicate, and especially how they communicate with relation to issues bigger than themselves, issues related to civic life, how we go on together, how we understand the past, how we talk about it, though, really the focus on speech. So this led to digging into the ambivalent, I should really say ambivalent attitudes with which Athenians and Romans viewed the capacity to communicate well. This was the 1990s, so gender studies and feminist critique was very much the talk of the town, and informed my the lens through which I was reading these texts. So I got fascinated with the ways in which the ambivalence of ancient Greek and Roman writers about the capacity of speech to change people, to push them to do things they wouldn't have otherwise thought they would do, to change their values, to change their perception of the world. This is clearly a power, a talent that elites want, because they want control over the masses and they want to advance their own intra-elite competitions. But they also understand it has kinship to the ways in which women persuade men to do things. It has kinship with the power that actors and entertainers have over us. So these things that manly men are supposed to keep an arm's length from. So that was really the subject of the PhD dissertation of how Plato, Cicero, other writers about rhetoric and politics talked about and tried to control and keep manly this skill capacity that they understood very well was not just the property of men. So that led to my first book, which was a different topic entirely, really about citizenship and how the Roman view of citizenship in the Roman Republic rested in the capacity to speak and persuade others. So it built on the dissertation, but it was a different kind of book.
Goodness me, all this is highly relevant to the present day.
I know. Yeah, it really is that. And I listened to the ways in which this cuts both ways, right? Because the power to persuade, or the power of speech is the power to persuade, but it's also the power to bully and the power to exclude and to build us-them relationships. So we have really seen in public discourse on a global stage over the last 10 years, longer, the power of speech to pull and push in some very troubling ways, of course, as well as some globally promising ways. Because this is, as Aristotle said, this is what is essential to humanity. I think now we would also be we are curious about plants and mushrooms and animals and how they communicate too. But just sticking with humans for now, this is one thing we can do. We can communicate, and it seems more essential than ever that figuring out, understanding the range of ways in which humans communicate with one another is crucial for the continuation and thriving of our species and animals and mushrooms and plants and the whole world.
Well, you hadn't lost your enthusiasm for communicating about the classics, because you then spent a good 20 years or more both teaching and researching into the classics. So did you enjoy the teaching?
Very much so. I found, especially teaching large lecture classes where, I think I was taught when I started teaching to be prepared for, one third of a big lecture class to be engaged and one third to be completely unengaged and then a third in the middle. And I was never satisfied with that equation. I could, maybe live with 5 or 10 people who were busy thinking about, what they were going to have for lunch or worried about some, losing their job out of school. I mean, really serious issues and banal issues. But I found it a great and exciting challenge to think of new ways to keep large lecture groups engaged. And then I loved the small group, seminar style teaching as well. And I did really find that what I think in academia has become a bit of a cliche to say that teaching informs one's research. I found that to be so true, because the ways in which students brought questions to the texts we read, their curiosities. I can think of a couple of ways. I was opened up to asking questions I had not seen or I thought were answered and could see were not through engaging with students. So I miss it, I confess.
Yeah, it's quite a skill to get students to open up. And I remember from my student days, I didn't get the feeling that that sort of participation was really welcome. So, is there a skill to it?
I think there's a curiosity about people that I'm fortunate to have, and a curiosity to hear other people's opinions and why they hold them that has stood me very well in the classroom. And I think, too, the pleasure of watching students bounce ideas off one another, which, as you say, you do have to be patient and pull opinions out of students, because they may be tentative for a million reasons, and it's easier at the end of the day just to sit back and let things flow. But I think the pleasure that students take in one another's opinion, in the exchange of opinions among themselves, if a teacher can amplify, can kind of perform that pleasure, express it, and then the students pick up on it and they feel empowered to express it, even when they disagree. That sense of fun, if I can use the word, applied in a very serious context. We could be discussing very, very serious issues, and yet that sense of free play and smooth exchange, even if it was in the form of an argument, really did carry the day. I'll say there's a Sanskrit word that I love to think about in this context, and that comes to mind. It's the opposite of Schadenfreude. The word is mudita, and mudita is the pleasure that one takes in in watching other people's success and their satisfaction and fulfillment. And I think a good teacher really has that, and then can instill that in students, and that sense of like, oh, she got it. Oh, yes, now I see this thing I didn't see before. Oh, and he's saying this and they're saying that. That sense of excitement, there's nothing like it.
Isn't it wonderful that we English users know the word for Schadenfreude, but we don't know the opposite?
And of course, we have no word for it in English either, right?
No, no. So after 20 years of what was clearly a highly successful academic career, and including many articles and books, you then took the role at ACLS. So why switch?
I think it's a good question. I think what drew me to ACLS was the opportunity to bring to a different context, and I now run a nonprofit. We're very much allied with and work closely every single day with academic institutions, but it was a chance to bring to a different context some of the skills that I had gained as an academic administrator, and of course as a faculty member, a scholar, and a teacher. And frankly, it was a chance to try to solve problems and really try to tackle one challenge in particular, which is really the mission of ACLS, which is to advance humanistic inquiry in the United States, but around the world, because I could see from my experience as a teacher, as a scholar, as an administrator, the ways in which humanistic inquiry was disrespected even as a category. I encountered people at all levels of the administration and among trustees at both the City University of New York and New York University, my prior two positions, who were good people, smart people, wanted the best for the university, but just didn't have a clear understanding of what research, scholarship, and teaching in the humanities and social sciences or the liberal arts really meant. So I thought, having seen this phenomenon, having also come to the understanding that these people who ask these questions and who express skepticism are not evil, they're not stupid, they're not, they're real people. They want the best for the academic community, but for whatever set of reasons in their own formation and their own experience, they really don't understand what the value of research and teaching in philosophy, history, music, art history, literary studies, religious studies, etc. is. And in a time of great constraints, financial constraints, political pressures, we have to be, and we have to help others be better equipped to make the case. So I thought what pulled me to ACLS was the chance to be in a place that was a bit in between. We're a networked group. We're an association of associations. So a chance to try to work on something that I really care about in a very direct way.
Well, humanities certainly needs all the help it can get, so that's really worthwhile. Tell us a bit about why ACLS was founded. It's over 100 years old, I believe.
It is. We were founded in 1919 in the wake of World War I and the pandemic, the Spanish flu. We were founded by a number of European scholars in the humanities and social sciences, which at that point were really just emergent on the academic scene. And we came about as I mentioned, in response to World War I and response to the pandemic, we came into existence to meet a real need, which was to encourage and enhance communication across nations and across fields in the humanities and social sciences, country by country, ideally around the world. Now, of course, advances in technology, advances in geopolitical changes have made that original mission in some ways less central, because we have strong communication globally, worldwide, across scholars, but the need to work together to advocate for the humanities and social sciences in particular after a century in which the natural sciences have been so ascendant, and engineering and technology have been so dominant and so effective, and been so successful in capturing people's imaginations of what the university should do. We still find that international mission. We still belong to this international organization in response to which we were originally founded, in seeking to coordinate efforts to advocate together. But over the years, and this began in the 20s and 30s, ACLS has also put energy, a lot of energy and focus into encouraging the growth of fields that are emergent, that don't have the respect or status or funding that they need and deserve. That started with African studies in the 1930s, and ACLS is very proud of the role we played in convening scholars across universities, both very fancy, well-funded, elite private universities and new private and public universities, to gain recognition and legitimacy for African studies, an area that, for reasons having to do with attitudes towards race and class at the time, didn't get the attention and funding that it needed. So we played a role there, lifting up the work of Black American scholars who were seeking to understand language, literature, heritage, religion, philosophy, the transmission of African traditions to the United States in the course of the slave trade and beyond. And then since then, we played a major role in organizing the National Endowment for the Humanities, which we're still fighting for today. We may want to talk a little bit about that, because that's a never-ending fight. And then in the 80s and 90s, we really dug into funding, which also remains an ongoing fight. We massively grew our capacity to fund scholars on an individual and group basis, but mostly individuals, through fellowship and grant competitions. We today are very, very proud to distribute between $23 and $25 million a year to extraordinary scholars. And all I can say is that for every scholar we fund, we really feel there are half a dozen others, we could fund who would do also excellent work. I mean, the quality of work out there is so impressive, and what's needed is funding for it. So we turn our shoulders to that mill as well.
Mm-hmm. So where does the money come from? I believe it's a member-based organization.
It is, but most of our funding does not come from dues. The dues comprise one element of it, but overall, our budget is about 20% supported by our endowment, which, thanks to my predecessors going back so many decades now, stands at a really healthy $200 million, which is small beans if you're at a large corporation or a big university, but very, very significant for a humanities organization. We're grateful to have that. The rest of the funding, but by far the majority of that, comes from foundations with whom we have strong partner relationships. And I'll just name a couple without slighting all the others. But the Andrew Mellon Foundation has been enormously important to us, going back as long as Mellon has been around, which is a little over 50 years now. The Henry Luce Foundation as well, another major funder. We're immensely grateful to these foundations for keeping our work going. We have two types of member networks. You mentioned those. We have our constitutive member societies, and they really make us special. They make ACLS what we are. We are the American Council of Learned Societies, and it's such a cumbersome and old-fashioned name, I know, but we don't want to get rid of it because any other name, and believe me, I have kicked around alternatives. I think my predecessors did as well, just because it's hard to say and hard to remember. In the U.S., probably not a problem for you, but in the U.S., people confuse ACLS with ACLU, which is the free speech advocate. When I moved to ACLS, a number of my friends and acquaintances said to me, "Joy, congratulations, but I had no idea you had a deep record in advocacy for free speech." I said, "Oh, wrong organization." So we know we function under a certain burden of a difficult to understand name, but we hold on to it because the societies, 81 members now, they do represent this incredible breadth and diversity of disciplinary and interdisciplinary and area studies in this country that together really represent, the beating heart of the American professoriate and the many, many independent scholars that advance the state of our knowledge. So I like to think of this example. If you meet an academic, anywhere and say, "What do you do for a living?" the person probably doesn't say, "I work for the University of Massachusetts." They probably say, "I'm a philosopher," or "I'm a historian," or I'm an English professor, or "I'm a scholar of literary studies." So this membership in these societies, this is where academics' hearts and minds are. And going back to my personal mission in life and the mission of ACLS, which are really the same, which is to advocate for humanistic inquiry, we need to do that, but we need to do it in a smart way and recognize some of the ways in which academic practice needs to change in order to meet the needs of the moment. So if we're going to be effective advocates, that means engaging especially active faculty and graduate students in the work of evolving our fields and our professional practices in a variety of ways. And that really means working with and supporting our member societies, because that's where our colleagues, our scholars around the country look when they look for models and ideas, colleagues, with whom to talk as they try to change their departments, their degree programs, course requirements, etc. So we're there, we hope, as a positive force for change, both in policy and in culture, which is asking a lot. But that's really the Society's métier. And then just more briefly, I can say our second membership set of membership networks, there's two of them. We have the ACLS Research University Consortium, which is a membership group of 45 universities that produce, among them, by far the majority of humanities and social sciences PhDs in the country. And then we have a larger network. It's about 250 institutions, and we're trying to increase that all the time. And this represents a very diverse group of universities, not all PhD granting, not all universities. Some of them are colleges, liberal arts colleges, HBCUs, but we rely heavily on this network to help us understand what's on the minds, and especially what's worrying faculty and administrators all over the country as they try to meet the pressures of the moment.
It's remarkable. Is there an equivalent to ACLS in other countries?
There are various academies that fulfill some of our functions, but we don't think that there's any exact equivalent. So as much as we try to be careful using the word unique, we tend to use words like distinctive to avoid getting caught out in an error. So I'd welcome anyone hearing this podcast to email me and say, no, we have this. But again, yeah, we overlap in some respects with national academies of arts and science, but around the world. But we don't think any group on the planet has quite our exact grasp and scope.
Mm. This must be a challenging question, but ACLS in many respects is similar to other funders like Wellcome or and so on. So how do you measure the success of your activities?
Oh, this is something, yeah, as you say, it's a difficult question. It's one that we discuss all the time. We can measure success in a few ways, and one is through engagement. So do our members continue to find us valuable? Do they continue to stay engaged? And so far the answer has been yes, and with growth in recent years, which is wonderful to see. The question to ask of our grant programs in particular, again, one way to come at it is, are people interested? Do they find our funding useful? Do they apply to get it? And, I have to say here, fortunately and unfortunately, the answer is a strong yes. And I only say unfortunately because we know it's effort for scholars to put in for grants and fellowships. And so having a low success rate is not good news, wholly, because it means we know that at this point, about 96% in some programs of the people applying are not receiving funding, and that's something we simply wish there was more funding we could offer, and frankly that other organizations would offer too. But by that measure, in terms of engagement and application, thousands and thousands of people find what we're doing useful. In terms of other measures of success, I will say, by way of saying, stay tuned. We have a couple of initiatives that we think of informally in-house as future-related. Sometimes we talk about future-proofing the academy. Sometimes we talk about a new academy, capital N, capital A, as a kind of internal shorthand for the kind of more accessible academy, place that's publicly responsive. We want higher education to be an arena that's accessible, that means something to a bigger slice of the public. So I'll just mention two. We have two initiatives. We have more, but I'll just mention two. One related to open access and the circulation of scholarly material that we're trying to cultivate through and lift up through what we call the Arcadia Open Books Prize. And this is a prize that rewards both the authors of open books and in a few categories, in history, cultural studies, and other fields. And we also, part of that prize goes to the press, to the publishing press, to incentivize them to publish more books in open access. So our measure of success here will be both, are people getting nominated for the prize? Is it reaching the audience? Is that growing every year? So far, a couple years in, the answer is yes. And then how are we? How can we measure, and we are measuring, the number of books published open access and the number of presses who are willing to publish open access. So this is we believe, so important for the health and accessibility and vitality of our fields, and possible to measure through looking at the number of books that are circulating open access. So that's one. And the second change initiative I'll mention is a very new and hugely ambitious project that I'm enormously excited about. We're calling it Doctoral Futures, and it started out as a National Endowment for the Humanities grant, unfortunately canceled as a result of the Trump administration's activities back in April. But while we litigate that, we are very grateful to have the support of the Mellon Foundation in keeping that initiative going. And this is an ambitious attempt to encourage doctoral programs in the humanities and humanistic social sciences to really rethink from the ground up how they recruit and admit doctoral students, what they set them to do while they're in a doctoral program, and then what they expect them to do after they receive the PhD. So this has a whole, as you can imagine, a whole set of assessment and measurement processes built into it. And we really hope, this is a 3-year project, that by 2028, when we're reporting out the results of this, that we not only report out what we've done in the prior few years, but we map out, and brace yourself, because this may sound completely insane, but we absolutely believe we'll be able to do it. We want to map out the future of doctoral education for the coming 20 or 30 years, looking ahead to a changed world where AI tools or large language models are integrated into people's experience of college and university, where the world of work has radically changed. So we obviously won't be able to look into a crystal ball and predict the future, but we're going to be able, I think, at that point to do our best possible collective job of making broad predictions and setting standards and models for doctoral programs to follow in coming years.
You mentioned open access, and it's very, very visible that there's a huge disparity between the take-up of open access in the humanities and open access in the sciences, and perhaps this is indicative in some way of sort of a broader trend. Can you explain why that is?
I think that the views of humanists, in particular, when it comes to open access, well, I should say the resistance of humanists to open access, come from a couple sources. One is a belief, and it's a true belief, I think, that a key piece of humanistic inquiry rests in the eloquent articulation of opinions that are not necessarily truth claims, at least not scientific truth claims, and that there's more akin to the work of an artist, a kind of proprietary ownership over individual expression that makes open access seem very threatening, because it seems to put that at risk. That if one shares the initial articulation of an idea, much as scientists will share initial results, that if that's taken up by another without proper acknowledgement, or even with proper acknowledgement, that something's lost there. I don't believe this myself, but I think that's one powerful source of resistance among humanists. The second, I think, is that the mechanisms of circulation of knowledge, of dissemination of knowledge, simply aren't as clear to humanists at an early stage of their careers, or even into their mid-careers. I'd be interested to hear if you've had this, if you share this sense, as they are to scientists. when you're a doctoral student in the sciences, or even a master's student, or even an undergraduate in the lab sciences, part of your education is understanding how to get a grant, how the grant involves the production of results, how the results get disseminated. All of this is crystal clear. It's part of the work. If you're a humanist, that kind of institutional and procedural thinking doesn't come into play until after you've finished your dissertation, after you're well into your first job in some cases, and you realize you've got to publish your first book, you've got to submit articles. No one's, in many cases, taught you how to do that. So I think that's where, walls of ignorance get built through, no one's malicious intent, but it becomes yet another education to learn what this other beast is called open access, and the resistance then kicks in of, okay, I know how to navigate the system we have. Don't tell me I have to figure out a whole other system that, in any case, to go back to the first motivation, might somehow undermine my control or my ownership over my own work. Do you see that as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think another powerful reason is that and I'd love to get your views on this, is that so often technology seems to have been introduced first in the sciences, particularly in the life sciences, and as a result, those innovations have sometimes kind of taken for granted the way that humanities works, or perhaps ignored the way that humanities work. Classic example of this, the very phrase open science, which shouldn't just encompass science, but does, and tends to alienate an awful lot of humanists.
Absolutely true, and you're right. This is I'll add this to the third reason for the sources of resistance is technology, and my example for this is. And it pains me to say it, but when I think about the resources for multimedia or multimodal publication that have been available to us all for now decades, it isn't even just a matter of years, and it's a long time, that graphic design, that video, audio, the creation of maps, either interactive or static, all of these things could and should enhance humanistic scholarship and in its published form or publicly accessible form in a whole host of ways, and it's just, I don't want to say it's not there, because it is happening in many quarters, but it's not business as usual yet, and it really needs to be. So I think until we probably need, given the slowness of academia to change, we probably need another 10 or 15 years when we have the dominance of people who have grown up in a thoroughly digitized world, who are completely comfortable and facile with these tools. Mm-hmm. I guess I'll add a fourth reason, now that we're digging into this a bit, if I may, and that is a kind of an unfortunate collision of the public devaluing and the public movement away from books and long-form writing. Not that people aren't reading. People read short articles. People read online. All manner of things. And book sales continue in the U.S. to be strong in some genres. But long form nonfiction, especially scholarly and academic writing, it's a pretty crowded field. But it's also, in terms of output, but in terms of uptake or intake, less so. So that has happened, and that's collided with, I think, humanist sense of worry and fear as they see student numbers decline, and they see their own administrations, university administration, college administrations, lack of interest or decreases in cuts in funding to their fields, and they hold on to what they know, and they say, we've got to keep producing books, which are good things, and they are good things. These books have a long tradition. We've got to stick with the traditional form. It's good for people. And this, the technology, digital mapping, the use of graphics, the use of video, that's very easily contained in a box that's labeled newfangled, shoddy, sloppy, shallow, right? and it gives academics who have a lot of other things to worry about, it gives them a reason to put it away in a closet and not look at it again.
Your mention of books and comparing them with articles, there's a whole sort of whole discussion to be had on that one. One of the fascinating things about books is that actually some of the humanist practices seem interestingly to kind of predate some of the latest developments in open science. So the movement towards publish, review, curate, the idea of putting content up and inviting comments, is something which has been happening in the humanities for years.
Yes, and that kind of dialogue, could argue, goes all the way back to Plato and probably before. The notion that that the point of writing an idea and getting it out there is to engage someone or some group who will make it better. So that's the surfing we need to do. We need to surf that wave of deep interest, as you say, that goes back many, many years.
Let's move from the broad to the very specific. You mentioned the lawsuit about involving the National Endowment for the Humanities. What's the ACLS involvement in this area?
We are suing, and I will need to explain why the target of our suit is who it is, but we are suing the current administration of the National Endowment for the Humanities. That is the current administration appointed by the president, for their irresponsible, we believe, stewardship of the National Endowment for the Humanities. They're steering it away from its mission, as was mandated by Congress back in the 1960s when the NEH was founded, along with the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA. So our suit focuses on two aspects of the administration's activity since the inauguration of the president. One, the firing of over 65% of the NEH staff, which has made it, we argue in our litigation, impossible for the agency to do its work. And second, the cancellation of millions of dollars of grants that were dispersed, given out through a process, again, mandated by Congress, in place for many years, a process involving oversight, peer review, and the rollback, cancellation of these grants has done untold damage to the health and vitality of humanistic scholarship and its public access in this country. So we expect a ruling any day. We initiated this lawsuit on May 1st. We filed the suit together with two partners, the Modern Language Association and the American Historical Association. It's being heard in the Federal District, Southern District in New York. And we're hopeful that whatever the outcome of the ruling, and of course we hope it's in our favor, but we hope that the damage done in the last few months comes to the attention of more and more Americans as time goes on. We've done our best to get the story out and have been happy to have coverage in places like the New York Times. It's with so much change, with so much going on, with so much activity coming out of Washington on the domestic and the international front, it hasn't been easy, and I think we all see this as a strategy on the part of the current administration, to get things moving in so many directions all at the same time. It can become just difficult to keep track of what's going on. So we've been trying, as I said, to use this suit not to find silver lining in what is a terrible situation, but we have been trying to draw public attention to the truly amazing work that scholars do in terms of helping people understand our heritage, helping people think more clearly about human motivation and aspiration and all the things the humanities does, but really concretely to help send the message that scholars in the humanities in the U.S. and around the world, if we live in ivory towers, we don't want to, and most scholars don't. And places like the NEH make that make that desire real. They put scholars in public libraries. They help scholars in colleges and universities, build relationships with high school teachers and students. They connect knowledge, with communities. So that's why we're suing, and again, suing on these two grounds of irresponsible leadership, and we're hoping for a positive ruling.
Sounds good. Let's keep our fingers crossed. This is an example, what you describe is of ACLS, if you like, working on behalf of all the societies as a group and institutions. Do you also provide sort of guidance and sort of and ideas for individual members for how to do things?
We do, and more and in varying ways depending on what societies need at a given time. Right now, we're very interested in using the forums we have with societies to encourage them to think ambitiously about issues like open access and about their own role in encouraging reform, especially related to doctoral education, as I mentioned before. With open access in particular, and especially as it pertains to individual societies' journals, which each one of our societies runs at least one, in some cases, many journals, and flagship publications that have been around for decades. They have a lot of influence and great status. With the societies, the challenge is financial, that it isn't clear to any of us on what basis a society can charge dues when we change not only the model, the publishing model, business model, but also at the same time, societies are dealing with huge change when it comes to the annual meeting model, or that way in which the annual meeting provides revenue that powers the whole organization. Post-COVID, the future of the annual meeting is a constant topic. COVID, I could say, drew attention to the numbers of scholars who, from their perspective, in an ideal world, they wouldn't have to go to an annual meeting at all in terms of travel, physically, whether they're looking after older parents or children, or they have disabilities, a dozen reasons. So in this sense, the pandemic opened society's eyes and forced us all to pay attention to people who had largely been shut out of the conversation and told to just put up with it, that this was the annual meeting and it had always been thus and it shall always be thus. Well, it turns out it's not always going to be thus, and the same goes, of course, with open access. So these are two examples of complicated, cultural and financial and professional processes that societies know they will figure out better if they do it collectively. So we play a role in providing a forum, but we also bring professional expertise to the table in helping nudge societies along.
This is invaluable because I'm sure you've seen how studies in the UK have shown a dramatic, in the last sort of 25, 30 years, shift away from self-publishing towards hosting journals with other on other platforms, and that's perhaps indicative of a more fundamental shift, as you mentioned, of the whole role of what societies believe they're there for. I mean, many societies were founded to get their members' content published, so managing that must be quite a challenge.
It is, and I think even as the notion of individual publication at the same time is coming to the fore, and increasingly scholars in interdisciplinary areas or even in disciplines tackling big questions, they're doing so just like scientists, in teams. So figuring out how to measure the individual contribution to a particular project or publication, ensuring that the hiring and reward process of tenure in the United States, but even in universities that have moved away from tenure, renewal of contracts and promotion and merit pay and all the rest. These are things that really affect scholars' lives and livelihoods, and the society is really where it's at, even though the society isn't the employer, the university or institution or nonprofit is, but this is the case for the centrality of societies. I think they've got to be at the table to help these conversations move forward in a way that sustains the knowledge production business, but that does so in a just and equitable way, so that scholars are living decent lives.
Mm-hmm. I was astonished when I was looking at your CV to see that in addition to the work you do running ACLS, you still get time for research. I believe you're still writing a book.
I am. I call it the midnight to 2 a.m. slot. Right? This is the and as I get older, it's maybe becoming the 10 p.m. to midnight slot. But yeah, I couldn't, I think, sustain administrative work 100%. I think the other side of my brain helps the rest go forward. So I'm working on a book and hope very much to finish it this year. It's called All the World's Pasts. It's gone through a couple title changes, but this is, I think, where I've landed. And it's a book arguing for the necessity of deep understanding and research and teaching in ancient cultures, in making that central and available to as many students and members of the public as we possibly can. But it argues that we need, and I'm thinking specifically of the United States, but this applies in different ways all over the world, we really need to move away from a formation of, quote unquote, the study of antiquity. Antiquity meaning really just ancient Mediterranean civilizations, Greece and Rome, which I refer to in the book as a single word, Greece and Rome, all mushed together. And I think appropriately, because of course they're different. I'm not arguing they're the same, but by any means. But the starting really in the late 18th century and through the 19th century, scholars in Western Europe and then in the United States and then around the world, put so much energy into forming a discipline that they called, the study of antiquity, focused on these two societies, that it has warped our sense of what the ancient world was, and what it has come to stand for. So the way forward is to really think hard about redistributing resources and focuses of study so that we do more foundational research in ancient civilizations in Africa and the Americas and Asia and Australia, and that we foster more collaboration. So this is why the book is called All the World's Pasts. It's very much grounded in my engagement with thinkers like Achille Mbembe, a Cameroonian scholar who's now based in South Africa, and his thinking about planetary well-being. It's also, though, engaging very much with the work of Hannah Arendt, a thinker who's been on my mind for many, many years, she has a wonderful formulation talking about coming around a table, to use her phrase, to exchange ideas about how we can live together that are informed by history. So even though Hannah Arendt herself was very much a product of her time in thinking of antiquity, quote unquote, as Greece and Rome, all one word, I would like to think, if she were alive today, she would be intrigued by the idea of a global or planetary antiquities in the plural, or ancient worlds in the plural, because I think she would understand, at least I hope she would, that to enable the kind of free and equal communication among people that she thought so deeply about and she valued so highly, we need to understand and study the heritages of all peoples. So wish me luck in the 10 p.m. to midnight slot.
It sounds like a fascinating title. So one last question, and I think I know the answer to this, but if you were talking to a would-be graduate, somebody just setting out to do a PhD, would you still recommend that they study not just Greece and Rome, but sort of the world of antiquity in its entirety?
Yes, I would wholeheartedly, if they have some guts and if they're ready for anything. We live in a world, as you know very well, where certainty is just not on the table when it comes to planning the future for any of us in any institution or any group, and for any individual. So contrary to 1991, 92, and I was thinking about what to do with my life and whether I might go to graduate school, it was certainly understood the job market was difficult, and one had to be prepared for perhaps several years longer of working in temporary jobs. But there was certainly a sense that if you worked hard and did good work and published a few articles, you would find your slot. might not be where you expected or hoped initially, but that you would find some kind of full-time academic job. Both, the experience of the last few decades and the current statistics tell us that that is simply just not the case for doctoral students in the humanities and social sciences these days. And even in the sciences, of course, it's always been the case that in the lab sciences, 50% of PhDs have gone on to industry. So we're now moving to that model, you could say, in the humanities and social sciences, and I think we're finally beginning to embrace it. So, which I think is a good thing. Not a bad thing at all, in my view, to have PhDs in ancient studies or in literary studies or philosophy or history or what have you, to move into all manner of for-profit and non-profit work. I'm not Plato. I would love to have philosopher kings ruling the world unashamedly, unapologetically. Of course, he wanted the philosopher kings, but he had some reservations about the boldness with which they could rule. So I would say boldly go. So yeah, all of that with enthusiastic recommendation, but with the equally enthusiastic imperative that they be ready for anything and seize whatever opportunity that comes their way.
Sounds like a great recommendation, and all I can add is that I just wish I'd had you as a teacher when I was an undergraduate. It might have changed the way I did humanities. Anyway, thanks very much for your time, Joy, and it's great to sort of to have your input. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking. Thank you.